of conservation and preservation of a species.
Landowner complaints, drought conditions, fair chase conversation.
It's just like steroids in baseball, as one of our constituents wrote in his letter to the commission.
Welcome to the Built to Hunt podcast, brought to you by the team of hunt advisors at the Huntin Fool magazine, where we are dedicated to helping our members go on more hunts with better information. Join Huntin Fool today at huntinfool.com.
With the new trail camera potential ban in the state of Arizona for hunting, we wanted to bring you this special interview with two of the commissioners from the Arizona Game and Fish Commission.
I know one thing for me, I think that might be valid too, is just understanding how the Arizona Game and Fish Commission works, how people are appointed, etc. Do you plan on that on the agenda?
I'm your old dog in all on the commission. So the way the commission system in Arizona is gubernatorially appointed. However, we have what's called a selection board that recommends to the governor no fewer than 2, no more than 5 names. That board kind of goes through, people apply to be appointed to the commission, and there's a new commissioner appointed every year. And Todd is actually our new commissioner right now. We're soon to get another new commissioner, and he won't be the new commissioner anymore. But every year you get a new commissioner. You serve a 5-year term. There cannot be more than one commissioner per county. And then there can be no more than 3 of one party. There's lots of factors, right? Which county? So right now I'm from Maricopa County, which is Phoenix, the Valley of the Sun. So no other commissioner could be appointed right now from Maricopa County until my term is up. And so the governor appoints from that no fewer than 2, no more than 5 each year. And so in essence, a lot of ways you have a new commission every year because you have a new member that comes on. I'm entering my 10th year on the commission.
Oh, wow.
I'm appointed by 2 governors. The current governor and the previous governor both appointed me to the commission. My background is in public policy. I am an avid hunter and angler. I'm a muzzleloader hunter, that's kind of my, on the hunting side. I prefer a blunderbuss over, I'm terrible with a bow, and I really enjoy muzzleloader hunting. I'm also a fly fisherman angler, which is also a passion of mine. I go back, in my personal experience, I served in the Reagan administration in Washington, D.C., in the White House and at the Department of Education and the Small Business Administration. I was deputy chief of staff for a governor here in Arizona, a former governor, worked in the attorney general's office for an attorney general. I have my own communications firm, which is a way of saying that we do both lobbying, legislative work at the federal and state level, but we also do corporate communications, those kinds of things. So that's kind of my personal background. And when I worked for the governor in Arizona, natural resources was my responsibility. I was a deputy chief of staff and responsible for all natural resource issues. That's always been a passion of mine. I started in college as a forestry major until I figured out it required math and science and changed to public administration.
Gotcha.
So that's kind of my.
You mentioned this is you're going on your 10th year, I think you said. And
yes.
Are there term limits, so to speak, in commissioner positions, or can it go indefinitely?
There's not term limits. There have been a couple commissioners in our state's history that have done 3 terms, and there's been a couple that have done 2 terms. It is unusual, but it is allowable. I mean, but there are no term limits.
Gotcha. And then what's the criteria on those 2 to 5 appointees each year? Like education, background, et cetera, like what creates a good candidate in your opinion?
Well, the selection board has criteria for who's on that board, right? Which includes, people from the ranching community, for example, sportsmen, the public, those kinds of things. To be a commissioner, there is no requirements of any kind of background.
Gotcha.
I think if, I've seen a lot, I've worked with a lot of commissioners over 10 years. And before that, in my previous life in public policy, I think to be a good commissioner, one is you have to have time because it takes a lot of time. So you have to have control of your schedule to me to be effective commissioner. Number two is you really have to look at a lot of competing interests because you're responsible for managing over 820 oversight. When I say managing, oversight of the management of 820 plus species of wildlife in Arizona, which is the most wildlife of any state that doesn't have a coast. So it's a complex ecosystem. And hunting is absolutely a major part of managing that ecosystem, managing populations, funding conservation. You guys know those realities better than most. But you have to be able to think in that totality. The second thing that makes Arizona, I think, an interesting place for managing over 820 species, we are the second most urbanized state in the United States, only behind Rhode Island. So we are more urbanized than New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, those places that you think of as being highly urbanized. We're actually more urbanized than they are. What that means in short is the vast majority of our population lives in two places, the Phoenix metro area and Tucson.
Yep.
But as you can imagine, that also impacts then the social dynamics of the state and affects policy, public policy, because the view shed of urbanites is often, as you know, different than the view shed of people from rural areas. So that's also, I think when you're on the commission, you have to understand all these dynamics. You also, as you guys know, because you're in Utah, we have very complicated and sophisticated relationships with our landowner lessees, which are an important part of managing the 820 species. They're an important part of access for our sportsmen. They are a big part of, we need them as partners in being able to manage wildlife, provide recreational opportunities / hunting and angling. Understanding those issues is also a part of being on the commission. And you have to fund all of this, right? We receive no taxpayer general fund dollars. None. Not a dime comes from the state of Arizona's general fund. So we have to, we get to eat what we kill in conservation. And that means figuring out long-term, how do you continue to fund a very complicated and complex wildlife agency and be able to do it effectively over, for decades to come without having tax money coming in from the state of Arizona. So that sometimes is a really complicated piece to all of this as well. As you know, some states get taxpayer dollars, some states don't. Some states are inside of a DNR, some aren't. Our commission, by the way, hires and fires the director. The governor does not. He reports to the commission. And if you were to equate us to another system, we are probably most similar to Idaho.
Well, that's very good, Chairman Davis. Thank you for sharing that background with us so we understand a little bit better. Like you say, we deal with every state, and every state is a little bit different. It looks like we've got Commissioner Geiler on here. Can you hear us?
Hello, how are you?
Yeah,
Hello, Commissioner. It's Kurt as well. Hope you're having a good day.
Oh, it's lovely. I'm in Phoenix. I'm out of my God-given country and put in this hellhole. But that's Phoenix.
I just got done giving them my background, Commissioner, and so you may want to fill them in on your background.
Oh, man. My background's very short. I'm not nearly as distinguished as my counterpart. Just lived in the northern Arizona since 1963. Before that, my dad, my granddad, my great-grandparents background has been in eye care and ranching and farming. So not much to brag about. Just one of those guys that puts their nose in the dirt and just keeps working and plugging along.
I'm going to brag a little on Commissioner Geiler because he won't. He's also an extraordinarily accomplished hunter. He is highly regarded in that community among, what I would call, I hate using these terms, but elite sportsman. He has those bona fides, and one of the reasons he's a huge asset to the commission because he has that strong perspective as well.
Very good. Well, we appreciate you, Commissioner Geiler and Chairman Davis, joining us today. As you know, at Huntin' Fool, we represent a lot of non-resident hunters, and we look at a lot of different states, 21 to be exact, and compare opportunities from state to state, mainly for non-resident constituents that intend to spend their dollars there. And so we hope to give our listeners and our members a little bit different perspective on this proposed rulemaking in specific regards to the take of wildlife or aid in the take of wildlife with trail cameras that's on the docket for Arizona. And Chairman, if you could give us just a little background of where we're at. I know a lot of our members are familiar with what happened in 2018 and what was passed with the live action trail cameras. Cell phone usage was passed to ban those, but where are we at? And then we'll get into some details about the why behind some of this.
Well, thanks for I think the perspective is an important part of this, the history. There are numerous things occurring in Arizona that you have to use as a kind of a view shed of what we're dealing with in Arizona. We are the fastest growing state in the United States. We have had license sales growth since 2012 every year. We have a COVID bump like everybody else does, but we were bumping big long before COVID. We have an application increase since 2013 of roughly 200,000 applications annually into our draw cycle. So you've got population of hunters, right, and licenses. You have, in Arizona, you have a combination of other factors. And you guys live with this in Utah, we're in a drought, in a long-term drought conditions. So we are dealing really, and right now, in a crisis mode on water. And we'll always be an arid state. That's not going to change in our lifetimes unless something really dramatic happens. But that's a piece of this puzzle. We have large sections, as I mentioned earlier, large partnerships and sections of access that we co-manage in essence with our landowner lessees. And so cameras, and we can get into the detail, have impacts on those folks as well. And they're an important part of our larger picture of hunting. We have social pressures from, you can call them fair chase. We have people that talk about this issue from a fair chase perspective. We have people who talk about this from a straight up hunter ethics perspective. We have a large urban population that sometimes doesn't understand take methods and can create havoc in the public policy arena on take methods. And I will give you an example. Last year, we had several bills that were introduced to eliminate cameras. One of those bills would have, by accident, banned duck hunting on water, right? Because the way the bill was written, it would have banned duck hunting or goose, either. Any kind of flying bird that would land on water, it would have banned that. That was not the legislator's intent. We convinced that legislator to pull his bills. The year before that, we also had bills on cameras since 2018. One of the things the commission tries to do is protect commission authority over these public policy issues, because as you guys, I know, covering these issues in multiple states, know legislatures often screw these things up. And when you get bad bills, it's really hard to undo them. And so one of the beauties of the Arizona system is we have a strong commission system, which allows for most of those decisions stay within the commission process, which allows for better feedback from constituents. It allows for people to think about this in much deeper tones than, quite frankly, you do in a legislative session. That might be 90 days or 100 days, and there's lots of bills flying back and forth, and there's a lot of trading that goes on. So we try to keep these issues out of the legislative format, but this issue continues to grow to be part of that dynamic. So the commission in 2018 looked at cameras and unanimously agreed on transmitting, that we have issues with transmitting. Now, many of the issues with transmitting also were the same issues that apply to passive, to non-transmitting cameras. The commission was divided on that issue. And so at that time decided, and I was one of those people, I voted no because there was no sense in having a 3-2 vote, and voted no so that we just cleared off the deck for the moment, take a breather and a timeout. But we went through, before 2018, we did probably about a year and a half of review of cameras, the pressures, what was going on in the field, hunter-on-hunter conflict, all kinds of things, biological, landowner relations, all these aspects. Fair chase, North American model, all of these things, pieces of this conversation. Water, Arizona being an arid state versus being Minnesota where there's water every 20 feet. All that stuff. We did that going into 18. Then came to the transmitting ban, left alone the passives. During that time, these other things continue to happen. State continues to grow. More licenses are sold. More applications are put into hunt. And as you know, people use cameras while they're also waiting to put in. So it's not necessarily just because you get drawn. Landowner complaints, drought conditions, fair chase conversations. And again, as we mentioned earlier, last year, we had some very bad legislation that we were able to get pulled. All of those things continue to happen after 2018. So that fast forwards to now, the commission chose to open the rules package. When you open a rules package, you then put out language for discussion. We put out the language that is in front of the public in comment right now, but between January 1st and January 31st. And then the commission will all those comments, feedback and all that is melded together. We look at that. It's not a voting chart, it's not a public opinion survey. We look at what people say, ideas they have. Many of the ideas people send us, have been things that have been contemplated numerous times, but that's fine. They send it. They don't know that. They send in comments. We look through all those comments, the staff does, and the commission. And then in March, we will determine whether we are going to keep the language as proposed, modify it and go back out to the public with some other language, or take no action. And that will occur probably in the March timeframe, because it'll be hard to take all the data that we get through the 31st of January and meld it in time for the February meeting. Because staff goes through every single comment. Commissioners, we get them as they come in. We've been reading them all. And so that's how the process works, which is, by the way, a lot better than the legislative process. And thus why it belongs in this arena from my perspective. And I think Commissioner Geiler will agree with that. Dr. Geiler will agree with that. So that's where we sit. But the pressures and the issues and the problems that we've had with cameras didn't stop in 2018.
Let me ask you one clarifying comment, Chairman. If you keep the language that has been proposed, would that be what we refer to as option one, where it would ban all use for the take. I see option 2 is still there. Is that something we can comment on, or is it just option
No.
1?
You can't legally put out options. So when it came to the commission, we can only put out one form of language. Those options were options provided by the department. And then we choose one of the options, or we rewrite it and we put it out. You can't put out 2 and say, hey, which one do you like better? That's not legal under the rules process. And there's a lot of good reasons for that.
I would echo something that the chairman just said. The way the process has been put together in Arizona, the way that we have to do stuff legally is to keep everything above board so that our constituency isn't caught off guard by commission decisions that adversely affect them. Is that a correct way to say that, Chairman?
That's a perfect way, yeah. Policy is slow on rules on purpose.
Correct.
What would be properly commented on by the public in this comment period would be the complete ban of trail cameras and any
Correct.
additional ideas they might have, or going back to some of the...
They can
include that.
Provide any apps, and they do. I mean, we get ones that talk about seasons, which is basically option 2 under your list. They have all kinds of options. We get an array of thoughtful ideas. Many of the ideas on the surface, I want to caveat, because they're very thoughtful. They make sense sometimes when you first say them, and then they make less sense sometimes when you really examine it. So let me give you an example. Somebody will come in, right, artfully so, and again, I'm not being critical, and they'll say, hey, I want to do something about cameras. I want you just to take them off of water. Okay, that's not an irrational idea. One of the things we looked at with that, because we've been looking at this for years, is that you actually may increase the number of cameras you have in the field, because people with the ability, and there are a lot, as you know, the price of cameras, the technology has gone down over time. We now sell them in 2 and 6 packs, as opposed to when they first came out, you were lucky to be able to afford one, right?
Right.
Now you can afford a lot of them. You will end up with more cameras because people will put cameras on every game trail into the water. So you'll end up with more cameras than you would if you simply just said you can't have them, whatever, 400 yards, 300 yards, pick what your favorite is, 100 yards from water. Not a crazy idea, a very good idea. But when you really walk through it, what might happen, it becomes very different. And if we're on a rancher's property and we end up with even more cameras on those water holes that rancher has built that benefit wildlife, and we end up with even more cameras and more people checking, instead of checking 1, checking 4 times 20, we're going to be interfering quite a bit in that rancher's operations. So you have to think, this is where it gets really complicated, and this is where it's good you have quite frankly, a commission system, not a legislative system.
Right. Makes sense to me. I think one thing we wanted to ask about is, as we look down this information sheet of all the reasons behind this potential change, we've kind of categorized those into privacy issues, biological issues, livestock operation issues, disturbance of wildlife issues, and the big one that we come back to is listed as the first one is fair chase. I know Jared had some questions about our involvement. Of course, as hunters and sportsmen, we care deeply about fair chase and about our own personal ethics. And I understand that it is the commission's rule or ability in the state of Arizona to mandate on fair chase issues and to keep us in line as hunters and sportsmen. But where does the commission stand, or where is the commission able to make rules in the future on other fair chase issues. And ones we bring up are long-range rifle systems, the use of radios or communications in the field. We see that coming up a lot from our listeners as why trail cameras when we have these other things that they may feel personally are more against fair chase.
Correct. Great question.
I'd like to address that one.
Go ahead, Todd.
Those are fair questions, but I think when you look at technology and in totality, being a licensed guide in the state of Arizona prior to this appointment to the commission, and also being somebody who has been whose existence has been bonded to the management of not only the land but also the wildlife. When you start looking at the impact of a trail camera right now, and you guys are more than aware of it in the Henry Mountains, the Ponsagon, Elk Ridge, when you find that giant buck you get the picture, and you may not get many of them, but you get the picture. It's an eliminating tool that cuts the total area you're scouting down. Now, fair chase, there's no difference between a transmitting camera and a passive camera in that instant, because now you are looking for a specific animal, where in the past, in the 90s, when we were up there on the strip looking for animals, we would go out, fan out, and just start glass and hiking. We'd put the boots in the dirt and do the fair, give the animal the ability to escape and evade. And when you have the technologies coming out such as this, where you can buy a 3-pack, I'll just be quite upfront with every one of the listeners out there right now. If you're listening to this podcast, I am a member of Huntin' Fool. I have been for over a decade. I don't think you guys are aware of that. But more importantly, as I read through the articles, you start seeing some names come up routinely as guides, and I will say they're ethical guides. It doesn't matter whether it's Clay Bundy, Albie Johnson, Matt Schimberg, Brian Goswick, but these are people that have historically been putting their time in, and they have watched this technology evolve just as I have. And we have had to become involved in the technology, or it's just like steroids in baseball, as one of our constituents wrote in his letter to the commission. And so when you start to bring in long range rifles, you start coming in and bringing the optics end of it. I look at it through a different lens, and this is somebody who sits on this commission and has killed the over 200-inch typical and has multiple, 210 plus non-typicals. The long range for me as a hunter is that if I have a marginal shot, I need to be able to dial in and dispatch that animal in a compassionate way to limit suffering in the field. And so, yes, I'm able to make that shot. I made a horrible shot in 2013 on a monster archery buck, and I shanked the shot at 11 yards. And so I'm not very proud of that, but we tracked that animal, and Matt and I, after 50 hours of continuous tracking, I put an 88-yard shot on that deer. Does that make me any less ethical an individual? I would say no. I stuck with that animal. I hunted that animal, and when it got done, it was a relief, and it was compassionate with an X-ring shot at 88 yards. The mixing these cameras in with that kind of a scenario, and there are valid arguments both ways, but at this point in my thinking, it is apples and oranges. Because as we go out and we're looking for the animal, you have to have that ability to dispatch a wounded animal quickly and efficiently. You have to find them and get your job done. But when you sit there and you look at the animal and you're trying to find them, that animal has to live in its natural habitat, we get to go home. There is a finite supply of wildlife in the state of Arizona. We don't have an antelope ferry and we don't have a mule deer ferry. We have to be, as a commission, looking at our constituency and watching out from them from a multiple and varying threat matrix. We have to watch for folks off that are the anti-hunting crowd, and they are right. They are allowed their thoughts and opinions. The legislators, they are not adept at handling wildlife management, and we have to watch them. But we also have to watch out for ourselves, because ultimately, through overharvest, and mind you, this is a group of people that are hunters that we'll watch what's going on in Washington, and we don't really give a hoot. We worry more about our hunting applications than we do paying our taxes. So when you start looking at the technology, gentlemen, I think that the commission as a whole, and I'm the new guy, I'll be quite, when you look at Chairman Davis, he is institution of knowledge about past battles. But when you look at the new guy coming on, I'm looking at it to preserve. I'm looking through a lens of conservation and preservation of a species. And so that is the way I'm looking at the camera issue versus these others. What's next? Are we going to outlaw laminated wood atlatls? It's a moot point. And so at this juncture, Arizona is trying to do something, given the drought, the incredible influx of people, and the outside changes that we are having to deal with as a hunting community, so that we have a heritage to pass down in the future. And that's an awfully long-winded way for me to talk, and I think Davis will say that's more than I've heard him say in the last week.
Yeah. No, Dr. Geiler, Commissioner Geiler says it very well. And to circle around to your question, fair chase, we have a fair chase committee that exists because technology, we've dealt with things like drones, right? We've dealt with things like the use of aircraft. We've dealt with certain weaponry, right? We don't allow exploding arrows, for example, right? There's always new technology. And part of the commission's responsibility is to evaluate that technology. And it doesn't mean because somebody likes that technology doesn't make them a bad person. It's a larger viewshed of how does that fit within all of these components that Commissioner Geiler laid out, which is preserving our heritage, being able to pass it on, being able to withstand the public policy machine that you could end up in a battle with, being able to pass on to the next generation basic skills. Okay, one of the things some of the people write into us about that are very opposed to cameras is a fear of we're going to lose an entire generation that knows how to do it the old way. Man hunted for thousands of years without cameras. My guess is we'll be successful in hunting for thousands of more years without cameras. And so all of these things are part of this analysis. And it doesn't mean if you like them, you're bad. That nobody wants to communicate that. Sometimes we don't think about incrementally what's happening to us and technology. As you guys know better than most of the technology starts as military technology, then it becomes police technology, and then it makes its way into the hunting community. Self-shooting rifles. How do you guys feel about self-shooting rifles? You think it'd be a good idea for people to set up the old rifle on a pod and blast away from their living room with their camera on the water hole, and then do the 2-hour drive and go pick up the carcass? I mean, those are things the commission has to think about, right? And some people go, that will never happen. Well, it could happen. And so part of our job is to always be looking at technology. So a lot of times the public doesn't see this because until an issue becomes quote unquote controversial. But we've been dealing with technology Baiting. We banned baiting years ago on the commission. Why? Because in the state of Arizona, it was causing and can cause all kinds of problems, from hunter conflict to fair chase issues to biological issues. I mean, we can go down the list. So those are things that are discussed by the commission, and they're discussed in this totality, not in a and what our job, we take an oath to ensure that we perpetuate the 828 species in this state into the future, so that my grandchildren can see them and your great-grandchildren can see them and maybe be able to hunt some of them. And we have to be thinking that way. And what is Arizona going to look like when we have 12 million people, which we will hit 12 million people here? What are we going to be when we have 15 million people? What are we going to be when we have 1 million hunting licenses in Arizona? And then you guys know the technology, the mapping technology now that exists, even if you're using a passive camera, the ability to pattern animals exists, right, within the current use of the technology. So those are all things. And is that going to get better over time, or is it going to get less? My guess is it'll get a lot better over time. So we have to think about those things, 20 years and 30 years. And I know, as Dr. Geiler said, he's right. People are more worried about that next app they're putting in, certainly over their taxes, and certainly overthinking 20 years from now. But as a commission, we have to think 10, 20 years down the road.
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate both of those answers a ton. And I think what you'd find from our hunt and fool team here, again, we spend thousands and thousands of hours a year with everybody who's trying to acquire coveted tags, all the way down to, general season, easier to obtain tags. And I think you would find us in lockstep agreement with, like, looking to the future, like what's this going to do 20, 30, 40 years down the road? And we talk about it daily in the office here about our concerns about technology, how it's going to impact future opportunities. And of course, again, from mostly a non-resident point of view, because I want that person in Wisconsin to be able to come out and have his or her first archery elk hunt, or chase a javelina around or whatever, right? So and that's where, like, we want to talk, when you're talking fair chase, it's like resonates really, really well with us. We like the idea behind it. It just seems that the one question I did have for you, Commissioner Geiler, you mentioned like the laminated _, which I got a kick out of. But and you mentioned the long range bow shot of 88 yards, which of course we would all agree is a very long archery shot. But it seems like every state, well, most states have restrictions on the most restricted weapons already, right? Archery is limited in and of itself from a physics point of view, muzzleloaders to a certain extent. But when it comes to the most lethal weapon of all, we're not hearing much of that conversation. And so we have all these conversations around other technologies like game cameras, et cetera. And of course, this is a very popular, unpopular opinion amongst the Hunt and Fool membership. I would argue that most of the members would run me out and tar and feather me for even suggesting it, but I do worry about what that does, particularly not necessarily in states like Arizona, where you guys have managed a lot of your hunts, at least the hunts most non-residents are chasing, have very high success rates, and you manage for that. Right? You want people to come out, and if they draw a sheep tag, they're probably going to get a sheep. And even your archery hunt successes for elk is just off the charts, right? Compared to like Idaho over the counter, for example. But I worry about states like Montana with a 6-week archery season and a 5-week rifle season, in places where, elk used to have escapement through those 5 weeks in general season units, and now they're getting shot off at 1,000, 1,200, 1,500 yards. So I just wonder how frequently the conversation, when you talk about fair chase in particular, what are the very hottest topics, and what are kind of, I guess, your internal thoughts on those?
After I introduced the motion to restrict game cameras, my comments and reflections prior to that motion have just I don't know how many hours a day I'm answering questions about the way Arizona used to be. Because I'm the only one on the commission, and I'm sorry, Chairman Davis, but you get painted with the same brush. I'm the only one on the commission that has been and raised an unapologetic hunter. But that is steeped in the fact that my dad, my grandfather, and my great-grandfather were the influences, and the four of us were the original Fab Four going to the woods. And with that, when we were doing that stuff, it was also to the tail end of when Arizona had a limit. Once you drew an elk tag, you could not put in for 3 more years. Whether you were successful or not, you could not apply. We were still trying to bring our elk numbers back up to where to the unbelievable numbers that they are today. The same, and the elk, the deer, the antelope, the sheep, we didn't allow people to hunt sheep in this state until 1954. Mm-hmm. I was fortunate enough to have a tag in 2016. I put it in for one of the absolute roughest, most desolate places in the state. But I wanted to experience the sheep hunt, the ethos of sheep hunting, the way people did in 1954 when you could go back out. The fair chase is the absolute bedrock of our sport. The North American model, when you look, it doesn't matter whether it's Utah, Arizona, Colorado, it doesn't matter. At the turn of the century, from 1890 to about 1920, subsistence hunting absolutely decimated our wildlife herds. When you look at where we are from that point, and we'd all like to think we're getting smarter, but Arizona in a conservation lens cannot be examined that way, because in the 1950s, we went on ahead and had this great deer herd called the Kaibab deer herd. Maybe you've heard of them. Mm-hmm. We went on ahead at that point and did a very radical predator management control program up there, which caused a huge balloon in our numbers of mule deer on the Kaibab. But if you go through there today, and when you go back from a botany standpoint and you start looking at it with the arborist lens, you can still see where the aspen groves and our old growth were injured horribly with those animals trying to get by, to survive. You get looking at that period in Arizona history, and you reflect back to 1900, we thought we were doing something right. And wildlife management in those days, without sound scientific-based models to manage them from, we thought we were doing something right back then, but we had starving deer up and down the entire Kaibab Plateau. So when you start bringing up this argument with me, I am a generational Arizonan. I have the history, in these veins. That's all of my family has been in either Yavapai or Coconino counties by and large. There were a few aberrant ones that decided to move to Maricopa County, but that's because we ran them out of the quality counties. But the fact remains that back then in those days, my great-grandfather would go on ahead and get in his pickup and hire a cook down here, and with his buddy would take off on a 60-day deer hunting trip after they had done all of their harvesting down here in the greater Salt River Valley. The success that he enjoyed up there on the Kaibab and on the Strip and the Ponsagon, Elk Ridge, and even over into the Dolores region. I mean, they were gone for 60 days. Can you imagine that, guys? Think back about the bucks they saw and the things they experienced. And it was only in those periods after we had started applying the North American model and true fair chase, because without one, you don't have the other. It's like a glove with no hand. So these principles that we discuss today, they are steeped in our heritage. They are absolutely the bedrock of what we want to hand down to our future. The fortunes that I had, I want to pass those on. But when you start looking at, a year ago, I was a simple man. I wasn't on the commission. I had a nice life. I had one cell phone and one laptop. Today I'm sitting here. I've got 2 cell phones, 2 laptops, 3 tablets. I am a mess. And there is no way on God's green earth with any kind of a conscience that I can pass that kind of a mess to the next generation and go, hey, I had a good time, but you deal with it.
100%.
You're either a man, and more importantly, it doesn't matter whether you're a sportsman or a sportswoman. Everybody that sits there and purchases a hunting license or an angling license wants to pass that heritage on. We're willing to tax ourselves through the Pittman-Robertson Act and the Dingell-Johnson Act. We are willing to tax ourselves to make tomorrow a better day. When you look at game cameras and you look at all of the different angles that our sport has evolved into, by and large, the majority of the folks that are out there, the points and those points you bring up, I'm not discounting those, but those are the minority. Kurt Davis drives out in his motorhome to go look for turkeys. He goes out there with a group of guys. He sets up a great big fire. And when they go out, they go hunt their turkeys. Now, I do it with a bow. They want to do it with a shotgun. It doesn't matter the path that we take, in my opinion. The most important thing is that we do things ethically today so we have a species tomorrow. And that's as short as I could put it, and I'm long-winded twice. So that's
glad we could. That's what a podcast is about, is bringing out the chatterbox in everybody. So, I think that you would find if you sat down here in the Huntin' Fool office, there would be 100% agreement across the board. I mean, we're required to look at sustainability. It's honestly what puts food on our tables and gives us an opportunity, quite frankly, to do an unfair amount of hunting if you compare it to the rest of the world, who would love to have the opportunity like us to spend so many days in the field each year. So, I was just more curious about how it relates to all of that sustainability piece. And, I've been...
your other things you brought up are part of the commission's contemplation. When you start dealing with long-range technology or bows, arrows that actually can propel, have secondary propulsion capabilities.
Right.
Those are all absolutely, and they go through our fair chase matrix.
Yep.
The committee, and then again, we try to do this stuff very thoughtfully over time, through our biologists, through our policy people, through through our critter group partners, all of that. And so these things don't just bing bang zoom, they're done. They take a while, but you've touched on issues that are a reality, and there will be new realities that we haven't even thought about, right? New capabilities that will show up in the future.
Yeah. I'm sure they're being designed as we speak.
Yeah. And commissions have got to deal with that. And I just want to correct Commissioner Geiler on one thing. My wife doesn't let me take my RV on hunting trips. I have to take my stinky well tent. And I am allowed to take my RV on fishing trips if I confine it to 3 friends.
You are such a kept man.
As it relates to fair chase, a question for you guys. Do you think that fair chase can be defined differently in different environments? So
yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Without a doubt.
Because there are numerous pieces of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about one from my perspective, which is an arid state is far different than a wet state.
Yep.
Right? We can tell you exactly where every water hole is in Arizona. Every single water hole. I can't do that in Minnesota.
Right.
Right? There could be a new water hole every 30 days, depending on what the rainfall is, right? Or the snowfall. So it's a far different dynamic there, right, than that what we have in an arid desert state that's in an extraordinary drought circumstance. So that's one example of difference. There are cultural differences. There are.
Yeah.
Some of those conversations sometimes can be really uncomfortable, right, and difficult. And because Arizona has people from everywhere, sometimes they bring their cultural view shed with them. And well, I want to do it like I did it in Missouri, right? Or I want to do it like I did it in Georgia. Well, that may be fine, but if you start doing it like you did it in Georgia, trust me, you're going to have some problem with some of the other sportsmen here in Arizona. So the commission has to absolutely, and I want to be clear too. Dr. Geiler and I, Commissioner Geiler and I, Commissioner Guggenauer, I mean, you name. We all have a slightly different view of fair chase, just as you two probably have a slightly different view of fair chase.
For sure.
But where we do come together is that fair chase has got to be part of a long-term commission view of the management of wildlife so that people can come here from out of state 20 years from now, and people within Arizona can still go hunting 20 years from now, and that your great-grandchildren can go see wildlife on the land.
I mean, we all highly agree with that, and I respect your perspectives and sharing that with us. I think it's very thoughtful to understand the time you guys have put into understanding this and what you're truly trying to do. And any true sportsman is not going to argue with the fact that we want more animals for our kids and our grandkids, and we want to see more. And that's the public perspective to non-hunters or to those groups against us that they don't understand. And I think you guys have a big task in front of you to keep that perspective strong. I do have a question, and I don't want to get into what ifs and hypotheticals. That's not appropriate at this level. But I do have a question that keeps coming up about the verbiage in this rule as far as taking wildlife or aiding in the take of wildlife. And people keep asking us, how do they enforce that? And I know that's not your department. We have a whole law enforcement division at Arizona Game and Fish to take care of that. But I would bring up one instance where Jared here, for example, he has a lot of Arizona elk points, and he hopes someday to go on an early archery Arizona elk hunt. Now, I understand in this rule, as long as he's not using a camera to aid in the take or to take wildlife, right, he can run a camera for fun. He could take his kids out or his grandkids and go catalog elk and take a video, take a picture on his passive camera, and there would be nothing wrong with that. But now a couple years down the road, he finally draws his tag. Is there a limitation on time length, or if he referenced that camera? You see where I'm going?
Yeah, absolutely. And let me start, because this is a really critical point, because people bring this up all the time. Every rule that we have related to hunting is complicated in its enforcement, from an enforcement standpoint. Every rule that we have. People can figure out all kinds of ways to violate the rules. The difference is we know that we have 97% compliance by hunters in the sportsmen and women in the field. 97% compliance. So 3% of the people are trying to jack around with the edges, okay? And that's on everything from limits of trout to, inside a unit, outside a unit, crossbow versus a regular bow. We can go down the list of all kinds of things people can do that want to violate the law. So all the rules are hard to enforce because you don't have a game. We don't have a wildlife manager out on every single step and yard of the field, right? So we're all hunting and having to choose whether we obey or don't obey the rules. 97% of our folks do. So you have to build rules based on 97%. You don't build rules based on 3%. Because if you try to build the perfect rule, you'll never have a rule because it's impossible. So discretion is also granted to our officers. Okay? They use that discretion every day in their duties. That's not new. So if you're down here and you've taken your grandkids and you're taking pictures of wildlife and you have a nice bull that shows up on your camera, and then 2 years later you get a tag, I think the discretion will be, and by the way, you know, the people that violate the edges, we see them, Dr. Geiler and I see them for revocations all the time. They're self-selectors. They put stuff on Facebook. They tweet it out. They tell 16 of their best friends who get pissed off about what they did, and they call the department. They go to the bar, get drunk, and tell everybody about what they did. I can't tell you how many of those guys show up in front of us, right? They're self-selectors. There will be self-selectors in a camera scenario, just as there has been since we've banned transmitting. Okay? And that's, bottom line is, you don't make rules because of the 3%. You make rules to govern the ethical pursuit and the best science-based management of pursuing that wildlife.
I would echo one thing in on the tail end of that too, Chairman Davis. I hope you get that tag. I really do. I shot a raghorn last year with my bow, and I hope you get to do the same. It was just a small 382 bull. That's 370. The bad part of it was the guy that I was hunting with immediately 40 seconds afterwards shot a 435-inch bull. And I've been hunting with him for over 20 years. His name's Matt Schimberg. You put his picture in your magazine. He thinks his head's about as big as the Henry Mountains right now. It's a sad story. But
I'm very familiar with the bull and the both bulls and the story, by the way. That's awesome.
Yeah. I'm the homely guy in the picture with the raghorn, and the beautiful guy that looked like the Rajneesh is the one that got the big bull. But he has since cut his beard off. His friends and I are now thinking he's straight. It's a beautiful story with a happy ending. But the flop side to this is that referring back to that 3%. There is a absolute wonderful football coach out there in this world. His name's Lou Holtz, and he made a commencement speech, and there's something that absolutely rings true to this entire discussion. There is never the wrong time to do the right thing, and there is never a right time to do the wrong thing. And so the beautiful, beautiful thing about the hunting community is that 3%, we can't regulate them. We won't regulate them, and we have never regulated them. But through the absolute stellar ethos and the ethics that our general group, and when I say general, I mean it doesn't matter whether you're 83, 53, or 13. People know right from wrong. Now, last month we revoked a member of a family who was absolutely, totally, categorically so far out on the limb. I hope they cut that limb off behind them again, and they will. These are the people that keep doing stupid stuff, and we get to keep dealing with stupid issues. But the 97% of the public, we're going to be self-regulating in the long run. And it's not, when I say long run, law enforcement in Arizona is already having this discussion about the enforcement of the rule. Common sense enforcement of the rule. Now, I think everybody listening out there today would absolutely agree on this. Common sense seems to be gone. We have people working within the Arizona Game and Fish that are addressing common sense. Why are we having to do that? But we do. And so it's one of those things where, you know, it's like a biologist, an arborologist, and I'm ologist to death looking at some of the the different categories of people on the payroll, but that's the way life is, and common sense is gone. So there's never the wrong time to do the right thing. And when people see things that are wrong, we have Operation Game Thief, and we see those calls come in. And Arizona is a unique state. We have a very high ethical standard with our sportsmen and sportswomen, and into the future, I can only see as our state grows that bar being raised. And in that instance, that is absolutely the silver lining in this entire discussion.
Absolutely. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't ask this question. I'm only asking this on behalf of people like me with a lot of points and knowing the system in Arizona, how it works. B, I'm not going to run any trail cameras in Arizona. I want to be super clear about that if this passes, right? So, but I have to ask this question. I've got 21 elk points. I'm pretty much almost to the point where I can write my own check for what unit I want to draw for early archery. But because of the way the bonus pass works for you guys, I also can pretty much know when I'm going to draw a unit. As long as I don't try to outkick my coverage, right? I can guarantee that I'm going to draw, say, 3A, 3C or something like that. So
you bet.
If I were in those shoes and I'm 7 hours away from you guys over here in southern Utah, and I decide I want to run cameras for 2 summers in a row, knowing I'm not going to put in for the draw, but then the year that I finally decide I don't run any cameras or whatever else, that's where people ask themselves the question, am I the 3% in that case, or am I part of the 97 that's just trying to still make the most of 2 decades of applying in your state?
I'd like to address that. First of all, if you go on ahead and you run those cameras for 2 years and then you put in for the draw and you write your ticket and you don't run the cameras, then you are not using that camera, in my opinion, for the take of wildlife, because 12 months would have passed between your application and draw and the hunt. That animal's going to move. That's part of the fair chase aspect that, as a commissioner, I am basing my decisions on.
Gotcha.
We've been up on the strip while we had a workshop up at Mount Trumbull here in November, while everybody's sitting and holding hands around a campfire and having fellowship. I was the juvenile delinquent, since I'm the young guy on the commission, that snuck off to go look for deer. Now, I found a phenomenal 33-inch typical with a drop tine. I saw him, and if I go on ahead and I put a camera up this year and I get a couple pictures of him, but you know and I know that if you leave your batteries in that camera, in that environment, one of those batteries is going to break and you're going to get all that corrosive garbage through your camera. So what do? We go out, we pull our camera, we take out the batteries, we look at the chip, we go on ahead and reformat the chip, then we put it on a shelf, and then we wait for the roads to get clear. But we got a drought, so we can drive out there tomorrow. But in a real year, we have to go on ahead and then go back out. And part of the guys that are calling about having a season on this, they are aware that these folks are putting out their cameras in May. And, and I know that we're going to have every big buck patterned on the Arizona Strip by the time June 1st gets there. We're going to know where just basically the geographic location is of every big buck. Now, you're not going to be able to leave that camera out 24/7.
Right.
Because you're going to end up with a wrecked camera with all that corrosive garbage in there. And if my wife is doing her job as a good wife, she's cleaning a camera today, but I don't think she is. I think she's out walking my yellow lab.
You keep talking like that, she might be cleaning a gun.
Exactly right. That woman carries guns, knives, and hand grenades, and that's why I'm in Phoenix and she's in Prescott. So, but no, you're not. You in that scenario. That's why law enforcement is having their discussions. That's why the commission is having their discussions. That's why the folks that are interacting with the governor's office down on Washington Avenue, they're having their discussions. And then everybody gets together, because we're not helter-skelter putting together a rule to regulate all, and then we walk away from it and we feel good about it, and then that's it.
Right.
What we're doing is trying to make certain, and I hope I'm saying this right, because if I don't, I'm going to hear about it from the chairman of the Arizona Game and Fish Commission. But we are looking with thoughtful reflection on the past and looking to the future for science-based application with this rule. And I want you, when you put in for 3A, 3C, I want you to have the opportunity to go over there and to be able to select the animal in the right situation and make a clean, ethical shot inside of 11 yards and go on ahead and have the experience that when you're driving home, we couldn't use a lava bar and a Brillo pad to wipe the grin off your face. That's what the commission, that's what we want.
Right.
And so, you guys are not, categorically, those scenarios have already been run. And I'm speaking for the two regions I'm in, Region 2 and Region 3. Those have already, and that's Flagstaff and Kingman. We've already had this discussion, and to put your mind at ease, you're not in trouble on that one. It's the guy that sits there and says, "Hey, I got this picture," and 3 days later he's got the bull dead. Now we're going to have a problem.
Yep.
Am I wrong on that, Commissioner? Senior Reverend Father Chairman Davis?
Not at all. And again, those kinds of people, a lot of them will self-select. But I think Commissioner Geiler also brings up another piece of this, and I know you guys think about this. By the way, you are atypical hunters, right? You guys are more engaged, more scientific in your approach to when you apply and where you apply than the mass numbers of hunters. Okay, those are pops and grandpops, moms that put in every year, and they're certain units they like, whether they're a premier unit or not, and they want to take their kids hunting or their grandkids hunting. One of the things that we all have to be careful about, and this is, I've seen this in my 10 years on the commission, I've seen this change, and it's not good, is that hunting is also about the experience.
Yes.
It's not just about the harvest, right? And you can have a wildly successful hunt without a harvest. Because trust me, if that wasn't true, I'd be crying and frowning all the time, because with my blunderbuss, I've had a lot of unsuccessful hunts from a harvest standpoint.
Yep.
And had extraordinarily successful hunts from a hunting and companionship and a heritage and passing on to my grandson. He had his first he was on his first turkey hunt this year.
Awesome.
It was an extraordinary experience with my grandson. So all of these things, one of the things we've been doing sometimes with technology is increasing the expectation that if I get drawn, I'm gonna get, right? I'm gonna get. And in fact, I'm gonna get this one.
People also equate their points with that. If I get this many points, it equals this many inches of antler.
Yes. And what happens then over time, as we have more licenses, more people putting in, more people on the landscape scouting as they should and all that kind of thing, all the different kinds of hunts that we have going on in Arizona, which also sometimes create conflict because I'm working on my hunt while you're in your hunt. There's all kinds of pieces to this. Cameras play into that in a very significant way. We don't ever want to lose the grandpa walking on that game trail showing his grandson or a grandma showing their grandson. This is fresh track. This isn't fresh track. This is turkey scratch. This is squirrel scratch, right? This is an elk track that is fresh, and let's start working this hillside and pull out the binoculars and sit here for a while. We don't want to lose that because we create an environment of, hey, if I'm all technologied up and I got enough points, I'm guaranteed, quote unquote, this success. Mm-hmm. And if we change what the definition of success is, there aren't enough animals out there to make that happen. Right?
True.
So we've got to be better as a collective, as sportsmen and women, of also passing down all the intrinsic values of being in the field and being around the campfire and setting up the tent, surviving a monsoon storm or a snowstorm, right? Hiking, glassing, all of those things. That all has to be part of what we perpetuate into future generations.
For sure. Yeah, I think if Austin's most recent soapbox article in the Huntin' Fool was lockstep with that, and I wrote one about 3 months ago. I don't know which issue it was, but the same thing. Like, filled tags does not equal a great hunt necessarily. I mean, we all want to get one, or we wouldn't be hunters. But man, if that's how we measure success, we're really missing out on a huge opportunity to make the most of every season.
And this generation, and the old guys always pick on the next generation, but this generation is used to picking up a video game, and they're successful like in 5 minutes or less, right? And we got to be careful that we guard against that as sportsmen and women, that this is much more complicated, much more time intensive, much more devoting your effort, having some aching muscles, having some cold food in a wet tent, right? These are all parts of this experience. And, from some of us, it's also our church, right? It's where we go to church. And passing those things on is important, because the counter in our culture to that, to our kids and our grandkids, is it's got to be in the next 5 minutes. I've got my game controller and, I need instant results. And we got to guard against that as a sportsman and women community.
Yeah. Well, I can't thank you, commissioners, enough for participating with us on this. And I think you've shed some light on some very important topics that I hope all the listeners will consider before they write their public comment and submit it. Let's talk a little bit about that. Is it best to email you, commissioners, or go right to this rulemaking at aszgfd.gov? What is the best way to submit comments?
So you can do it
His
either
name
way.
is Kurt Davis, and you can send them directly to Kurt.
We'll put his cell phone in the show notes here.
No, I'll put it in the Love's truck stop. That'll work better.
They can do it either way or both. So
okay. Yeah,
that will get the rules email address will go directly into the public comment. And then if they want the commissioners to see it immediately, all of us on the commission have the same email address, as far as it's tgeiler@aszgfd.gov or it's kdavis@aszgfd.gov. And you can send it to all of us simultaneously. You can send it to one. And if we get them individually, we then forward them in to also be in the record. And we forward them they are forwarded to the other commissioners. So no matter what way they do it, the commission's going to see it, and the commission's going to see it, and the people that are accumulating all the comments will get it.
That's another part of the beautiful thing about the way Arizona is set up with its commission system, is that all of the commissioners will see this. Everybody will be enlightened at the same time with the same information.
Very good.
And we read them. We absolutely read them. And, sometimes I know Commissioner Geiler, myself, Commissioner Guggenauer, we will respond to some of them. Quite frankly, when people take the time to send a thoughtful comment, I try to send a response that at least says, hey, thank you for taking the time. When you get the ones that say, hey, you're a jerk and I hope your house burns down, I probably don't spend as much time responding to those. But, one thing as a commissioner, guys, is, and I'm sure you feel this sometimes running a podcast, you become a commissioner, again, you swear an oath, you care about over 820 species, you try to make the right decisions, but you will never leave the commission more popular than when you came on it. It is, if you're doing your job, because it's not easy, and we're volunteers too, right? We don't get paid for this other than we get $30 when we go to a meeting. We don't get paid for it. We care about these issues just as much like your listeners do, like you do. You're not in this for glory and fame because you don't get that. You're in it because you're trying to do the right thing for wildlife for the future. And a lot of people, sometimes I've gotten some lovely emails from guys that say, look, I don't agree with you, Commissioner Davis, but I do appreciate the time you spend on the commission. That makes you feel good as a commissioner, even though some person legitimately doesn't agree with you. I don't view anybody disagreeing with me as not legitimate. And then you get ones that say, hey, I'm totally with you, or I thought about this from a different perspective than I used to think about it. I've seen a lot of that, quite frankly, in the last 20 days. We've gotten a lot of those emails where people that this is not how I used to think, but now, you know what? I've taken a step back and I'm starting to look at this a little differently. All I hope is that the discourse is we've hurt discourse in our country, as we all know, over the last decade, and we need to see a return to having differences of opinion, but be done respectfully.
That's right. So there will be no public comment at the March meeting.
No. Good. No, it's great. You will be able to comment at the March meeting.
Okay.
You'll have 3 ways if you want to comment at the March meeting. One is you can go in person to the meeting site, which in March will be in southern Arizona, in Willcox, Arizona. We move the commission meetings around. We have to do some limitations on that now because of COVID, as far as how many people in the room at the same time. But you also will be able to go to any of our regional offices and comment on our 2-way connection. And if you're from out of state and you want to comment, there's also a phone line you can call in. And during the call to the public, and what we do is we usually allow 2 to 3 minutes per speaker. And as chair, I try to constantly remind them, please don't repeat what was already said. It's more helpful to the commission if you say something that we haven't heard before. And yes, there will be that period of time.
Very good. But until then, get our comments in submitted by the end of January. Like you said, emailing, and we can give you yay, nay, what we think, our ideas, and all those will be considered.
Yep. And they can wish us Happy New Year if they want.
Well, we'll do that for sure, fellas. We appreciate your time and Happy New Year.
Yeah. Happy New Year to you. Thank you so much. And
thanks for doing this.
Thanks for everything you do to keep Arizona what it is. It's a special state to all of us, and I know it is to you and your families, and we hope that it continues to be an icon of the West for wildlife management, big animals, and lots of opportunity. So thank you.
Thank you.
You bet. Thank you.